Once upon a time,
in a land far away.
I'm Katrina.
And I'm Geoff.
This is the Fairy Tellers Podcast.
Myth, legend, folklore, fable.
We explore what they say about cultures then and now,
Grab a hot cup of cocoa and a comfy seat
while we tell you a tale.
Welcome back to the podcast. Great to have you here with us again after somewhat of a break. The accidental break that we take every single May.
I'm starting to think, let's just call it next year, May 2027, we're going to have a hiatus. I'm saying it now.
At least we didn't promise mermaid this time.
Yeah, we did not promise mermaid, which I thought that was actually going to help us by not promising mermaid.
Right.
But I will tell you, I was actually doing research into mermaid, and maybe that did it. It was we didn't promise mermaid, but then I was like,
but because you
what
went,
if we
did?
Yeah, I ruined it.
Mermaid.
No, but more likely what it is that May is a crazy month in terms of school and work. And
yeah,
Geoff, it's always busy for you.
Yeah, it's like graduation, and then it's the end of the school year stuff for, kids, not,
yeah, yours.
Elementary, middle school, high school kids. So yeah, it gets kind of crazy. But also one cool thing that happened was, I guess this wasn't even May. This was actually in June, the very beginning of June, not that long ago, less than a week ago. We got to see each other in person, which was cool.
Yeah, it was. It was very cool. I have seen you in person more in the last year and a half than I have seen you the last decade.
Yeah, that's true. It's what happens when you move. I mean, you're still actually really far away, but a lot closer than you were before. When we're in the same time zone, it helps instead of being 2 or 3 time zones away from each other.
Not to mention, my children super appreciated that the drive out to you went by Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so we got to stop and look at Mothman. My daughter looked at the shiny hiney. She touched the shiny hiney. My son, I was like, do you want me to get a picture of you touching the shiny hiney? And he was like, no, I don't need to do that. And I was
So he didn't even touch it?
No, he didn't even touch it. Yeah.
He just not that he didn't get a photo of him touching it, but he's just nah, I don't need to do that.
Yeah. He was like, I don't see the purpose or the appeal of touching this cryptid's hind end. Teach their own. But then we went into the museum area of right next to the monument, and we're looking at, swag, wanting to get some, I don't know, stickers, patches, stuff. And my kids were seeing different cryptid related patches, and they were like, what's the Jersey Devil? And I was like, oh, actually, I've got some information on that. And then they were like, oh, tell us about Mothman. And I was like, actually, I have an episode of the podcast and I'm going to take a break from talking to you. How about you listen to my podcast? That's right, people. I made my children listen to me on a road trip. Listen to my podcast. What was funny was in that episode that we did Mothman, we also talked about, I think it's the lizard man.
Uh-huh.
But we listened to that while we were actually more towards the South Carolina area. And in the story, I'm talking about there's the Spanish moss hanging from the trees, flowing, and these small country roads in the dark, barely lit. And then the lizard man attacks and jumps on the top of the car and, rips it up on the side of the road or whatever. And my daughter was like, I don't know if I want to listen to this story.
When we're driving by small country roads at night and see the Spanish moss dangling from the trees, we can't.
Yeah. She was like, no, this is actually too real. And it was funny because we also talk about Ichabod Crane, man, and this will segue nicely into what we're actually going to talk about.
Nice.
But we started talking about Ichabod Crane in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And one thing that you and I in the episode about Sleepy Hollow we talked about, and in several other episodes have talked about, is this idea of people Ichabod craning, where they're freaking themselves out, to feel the thrill of being freaked out.
Uh-huh.
like almost to their own like detriment. But there's something to that. But that was 100% like what we were doing. That it was like, let's listen to like kind of spooky, freaky stories while we're in the environment where they happen. Ostension?
Heck yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I remember when we first recorded the Mothman episode, because I did so much research and because I love Mothman so much. But last summer, when we were driving up kind of the same route that you drove to come here, and we got to stop by the Mothman statue in, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We listened to it on the way up there to refresh our memories.
So, Ichabod Crane.
I was trying to think of a segue too. We had it. You had a really good. You're like, oh, Ichabod Crane. This will be a really good segue into talking. about what
and then I was like, I left him behind. No, so here's the segue, and it's gonna be a lengthy journey that we're like all going out together. No, Ichabod Crane. We talked about Ichabod Crane back in like the first year that we were doing the podcast in regards to legends. And it's really interesting because people think of the legend of Sleepy Hollow and Ichabod Crane as one of those like American legends when it is a literary tale.
Right.
But I love in that episode, we do like go into talking about the lengths to which Washington Irving had gone to make the story seem as if it was a legend that had like deep history.
Mm-hmm. And succeeded, apparently.
Yeah. Because, I mean, what's crazy is like at this point, I think it's been like 200 years since he wrote that story.
Uh-huh.
And because I think it was like the early 1800s, because it was about 50 years after the Revolutionary War, I want to say.
Yeah, I want to say the fact that he was named Washington Irving makes me think that it was post, Revolutionary War.
Yeah, that his parents were like excited about George Washington. They're like, do you know what name is really going to resonate? Washington.
Yeah. We named a state and a district after it. And a celebrated writer as well.
Did you find out when it was published?
Oh, 1820. Yeah. So
yeah, it's about 50 years after the Revolutionary War almost. And so, yeah, it's been over 200 years. And so people think of it as an American grown legend. And it is now, like, for sure. There's so many things in that area that are like Sleepy Hollow themed.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like in like Salem, Massachusetts. They kind of just like go with the fact that like people know one thing about Salem, Massachusetts, which, I suddenly am so tempted to take the episode in a different direction because I recently just like read a cool story that featured Salem, Massachusetts, but not for not for the thing that it's famous for, which if people don't know, I'm talking about the witch trials. Anyway. But as Caroline S. Brown said in her book, The Tall Tale, there are folk tall tales and literary tall tales, and we can never completely disentangle the oral from the written, which I was like, love that. Just because 100% when you're looking at like tall tales, the like American legends, it is really hard to separate out like what started off as an oral tale or what started off as a written tale that then became an oral tale, because sometimes things get like printed in newspapers as stories first, and then somebody in town will read that and be like, oh, that's really cool. And then they like extrapolate.
Yeah, start telling.
Yeah. And so I was thinking the segue. This is the world's longest segue. But yeah, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, legends, American legends. Today, I was thinking it would be really fun to do an episode celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States declaring independence. And that has been like a super big thing in the US this year, where you cannot escape the signage. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like every city is, doing something, like banners being put on like all the streets and different celebrations being planned for the 4th of July.
Yeah, there are like 2 or 3 individual houses in my neighborhood, like on my street, that I drive by to get home. There could be plenty of others that I just don't see in my neighborhood because I don't drive by them, but they that have even not just like, oh, here's flags and stuff like that, but something that's like
250th.
Like a banner, 250th anniversary of.
Yeah, there's somebody in my neighborhood that like the banner that says 250th, like on it, also that it's like printed. It's either on printed, like something that's printed to look antique, like, or the fabric itself is a color that kind of like lends itself to like thinking like, oh, that's old. Cool. This is antique. So a lot of people in my neighborhood too are like their own homes being like, I'm big into this. And I think it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that I struggle to be patriotic. I didn't grow up here. And so when it's like identifying with like the United States, I'm like, yeah, I'm American for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I did grow up here and I feel like, I'm decently patriotic, I guess, but like the 250th, I don't know, like it is a cool thing, but it's also like, what's so special about 250 years more than, 249 years, really? It's like an arbitrary round number. But it's one of those things too. Like here's something that I have difficulty with a lot of things is like celebrate. So a prime example of what I'm trying to say, because I don't exactly know what I'm trying to say. Perfect. I did not walk at my college graduation ceremony. I was in attendance at my like master's degree ceremony that I would have been like getting whatever my master's degree, but I did not as a graduate, I was actually just working the event. And I could have, you know what I mean? It wasn't like, because I had to work if I wanted to, but it's like, I just didn't want to. Cause I was like, I have a hard time, and it's not like it's difficult or something like that, like is anyway painful for me or whatever. And I'm like, so I avoid it purposefully, but like marking like milestones and like, like the celebration. Cause for me, here's the thing is I've noticed I'm like a very process kind of like oriented person in the way that like the master's degree happened like while I was sitting in those classes every day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like once I was done doing that, it was done, like that was me getting the master's degree. That was me getting, or, college degree, whatever, that was that. So it's like, it kind of like, there wasn't something super strong compelling me to be like, oh, like celebrating this achievement by walking across and getting an empty envelope that supposedly represents the diploma that I'm going to get, that I'm not actually even going to hang up. I'm just going to keep it in that folder and tuck it away somewhere. So again, it's like going on to this like 250th anniversary. It was like, that's really cool. It is cool. But it's like the 250 years that we've had as a country is kind of the cool part to me, more so than arbitrarily being like, this is how long it is. But I have tried to come around more to, not about the country, but like for my own life, like celebrating those like milestones, transitions, because I do think it actually is important.
Yeah. I feel like that's a lot coming from a man that celebrated Tuesday on February the 22nd in 2020.
2022.
Oh, sorry, my bad. In 2022, when you were like, after that day, there's nothing left to live for. And he stands by that, including the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Yeah, I'd have been much more excited about the 222nd anniversary, but I missed it. So anyway, how are we going to celebrate? Giving into, the patriotism that has taken over our neighborhoods.
Yes.
How are we going to contribute to this 250th celebration?
So one way that I was thinking about doing that was, I don't know if this is going to turn into like a couple different episodes. Let's just call today what it is. But I like the thought did cross my mind of like, oh, maybe like I can do a couple different episodes that kind of like span different decades and eras and sections of the United States. And I was like, no, that's too much. That's more enthusiasm than I want to give it. That's more patriotism than I wanted to give it. But I did think one thing that might be interesting is talking about tall tales in the United States. So tall tales comes from this idea of tall talk, which is exaggerated storytelling. So they started off not being called tall tales. The type of storytelling that a person would be doing would be called tall talk. And
tall talk,
this idea of like exaggerating everything to be like larger than life. And there's a couple things that were like precursors to the idea of these like tall tales, because we've always had like in myths and legends, we've had giants and big sea creatures and like animals and whatnot. But this exaggerated storytelling that we see in America in these like tales, it started in the 1800s, and people have like researchers, academics have kind of theorized that like the reason why Americans started coming up with these stories that are these like big grandiose exaggerations was because of the inhospitable land that was out here, the kind of unknowable creatures, because the people who are telling all of these stories, they are immigrants to the area. They are some of like the first people in their entire family to ever be on this land and discovering what there is. I think about what it would have been like, you know, if I had showed up not knowing anything about Australia and was walking around and I suddenly was seeing creatures that I had like absolutely no reference for.
Yeah, you'd probably want to lick them first thing,
which is a really good thing that somebody told me not to. Anyway, so people were experiencing the United States for the first time, and they were kind of up against this wilderness that was so much larger than life. Everything kind of seemed like it was against them. Like every American frontiersman or whatever was facing quite a daunting task. And these stories really reflect that harshness by creating these heroes that are basically as like gigantic and extravagantly huge and formidable like the environment. And so it's like, oh, they had all of these like exaggerated features that helped them to conquer what needed to be conquered and to be like the best that ever was. So there's this like idea, and I have a quote by a man named Kenneth S. Lynn, who is actually the author of the book Mark Twain and Southwestern Humor. And he said, every time Davy Crockett triumphs over man, vermin, and the cogwheels of the universe, the ordinary backwoodsman felt an identification with his own efforts to tame his part of the American woods. And so these tall talks, these exaggerated stories, were able to give people a sense of an ability to like take on these same qualities as their heroes and do maybe not as, you know, impossible feats of strength, but still do something that for most people felt like just an impossible, difficult, daunting task. So I was trying to avoid picking a character, a tall tale character that people have probably heard more about, because I was like, for this episode, I want to do something that maybe people are less familiar with. So I don't know, Geoff, if you were familiar with this character before I sent the like story over to you, but we are going to be hearing a story about Old Stormalong. And I want to say that this character actually started off as a character in a sea shanty. I'm like, we're back to sea shanties, guys.
It all comes back to sea shanties.
There once was a man who put to sea. Anyway, so in the 1930s, there was a man by the name of Frank Shea who was collecting and retelling old stories about Stormalong that were being told by sailors that used to work on old wooden ships. And it's like it started off as kind of like sea shanty, like a character in a sea shanty, and then there started to be, you know, all of these tall tales about this guy. And we'll get a little bit more into the other aspects, historical, cultural aspects of the story as we get into it. But Geoff is going to be telling us the story of Stormalong that is found in the book American Tall Tales by Mary Pope Osborne.
And to answer your question, no, I'd never heard of this character before, but now I am a fan of old Stormalong, of old Al Stormalong. All right, so one day in the early 1800s, a tidal wave crashed down on the shores of Cape Cod in New England. After the wave went back out to sea, the villagers heard this these deep, bellowing, crying sounds coming from the beach, and they all rushed out to find what was going on, what was making these sounds, and they couldn't believe what they saw, which was a giant baby that was 3 fathoms tall.
Woo!
Which is roughly 18 feet. I'm a roughly 1 fathom tall, but he was 3 fathoms tall. And so this giant baby, also, you probably will not have this memory in your brain, but some of our listeners might. There was this video game for Super Nintendo, might have been for Sega too, but it was called Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Have you heard of this video game?
No, you called it correctly when you said this isn't for you.
It's very distinct in my mind because there's this whole thing, one of the levels is Attack of the 50-foot baby or something like that. And there's this giant baby that's just stomping around this neighborhood, and you have to try not to get completely squished. And I'm picturing that baby. Although, this baby, I guess that was a 50-foot baby, and this is an 18-feet baby. But that's what I'm picturing. Anyway, so listeners, if you have played that game, I'm sure you have the same image come to mind. Or not. Now you do. Anyway, this giant baby was crawling on the sand, and it was crying in a voice that was as loud as a foghorn. And so the villagers are like, what are we going to do? How are we going to take care of this giant baby? So they shoved him into a wheelbarrow and carried him into town. And then they took him to kind of the local meeting house, and they just started feeding him barrels and barrels full of milk.
Of course.
That would be an expensive baby to keep fed. And I love this. So they fed him all this milk, and then there's 10 people who are patting the baby on his back so that they can, burp him. And they're discussing oh, what do you think we should name him? And then some little boy chimes in and he says, oh, how about Alfred Bulltop Stormalong? And we can call him Stormy for short. And the baby smiled at the boy in that moment and let out a giant burp that nearly ripped the roof all the way off of the meeting house. And everyone was like, yep, Stormy it is, because it was a big stormy burp that almost ripped their roof off. So as this town, I guess, collectively started taking care of this baby and he grew older, Stormy kind of became a big attraction for Cape Cod. Everyone wanted to come see the giant kid. And I guess soon to be, he will become a man at some point.
Yes.
But not yet. So he's still a child, because it does say here, he's 12, he's soon going to be 12 in this story. But he didn't like the attention because it reminded him all the time of the fact that he was different from everybody else. He was 3 times as tall as a grown man when he was a baby. So, when he would leave school at the end of the day, he would kind of sneak off and try to get to the ocean, which is where he had come from. And he liked to go swim out into the deep parts of the water, and he would, ride on the whales and porpoises out into the bay.
I've been staring at the edge of the water long as I can remember.
Exactly. Except he was going way out in it.
Yeah.
And his love for the water, much like Moana, was so intense and so strong that the people used to say that he must have had salt water in his veins, which I think is technically correct. We all have salt water in our veins.
Yeah.
Which is why they give you saline when you're in the hospital.
These are all true facts.
This is a medical advice podcast.
Our lawyers
would like us to say that this is not a medical advice podcast. Do not take medical advice from people that do not know what they're talking about.
And that's us.
Which is most people.
Yeah.
But especially us. So by the time Stormy was 12 years old, he was already 6 fathoms tall, which is about 36 feet. It was in this story that I learned that a fathom is about 6 feet, which I never knew, but now I do. So he turned 12 and they're like, well, guess you're a man now. You're going to have to go out into the world on your own. But they were saying the truth is, you've grown too big for this town. It's you can't fit in the schoolhouse. You can't fit in a store to work for a job. You know what you should do? You should go to Boston. Mm-hmm. It's a lot bigger than Cape Cod in Boston. And that's someone who's been to Boston. It's a bigger city than Cape Cod, but the buildings, while bigger, are still made for,
regular sized humans.
People, not people that are 36 feet tall. Anyway, Stormy, in that moment, feeling like an outcast, like he's always felt packed his trunk, put it on his back, and started off towards Boston. And when he got there, he discovered something that made him even more sad than when he began. And that was exactly what I just said a minute ago. That even though Boston had more buildings, they were buildings that were just as small on the inside. And worse than that, because he wasn't in a town that everyone grew up with this giant, or, had gotten used to this giant boy being there. No one had ever seen him before. He scared the crap out of everybody as he came into town, because there was a giant that they didn't know if he was, going to try to eat them or what, So everyone was super, super scared of him. says he scared the daylights out of everyone he met. And so there in Boston, he's like, oh man, I guess the only life for me is the sailor's life. I wanted to say pirate so bad, but just a sailor. Because he was grown up at sea. He was there looking at Boston Harbor. He's like, the sea is my best friend. I belong with her. And so he went and found the biggest ship he could find, which was called the Lady of the Sea, and, was going to try to join the crew. And when the captain saw him, he said, blow me down. I've never seen a man as big as you before. And then Stormy's like, well, I'm not a man. I'm 12 years old. So you still haven't seen a man as big as me. Only a boy. Only a child. And the captain says, blow me down again, which I love. And he's like, you'll probably be the biggest cabin boy in the entire world. Welcome aboard. And so, the sailors were very shocked and surprised to see a 36-foot giant as their new cabin boy. But after a while, they got used to it and they kind of accepted his, gigantic size and just got used to him, being one of the crew. But one day when they were anchored off of the coast of South America, the captain was like yelling out for the crew to hoist the anchor. But when they pulled on the chain of the anchor, nothing happened. Like it wouldn't budge. And the sailors were like heaving and hoeing, and, the anchor still was stuck at the bottom of the ocean. And so Stormy's like, I'll take care of it. And he took a knife, stuck it between his teeth, which I'm like, was it a giant knife? Was it a him-sized knife or a normal-sized knife? Doesn't matter.
This is my mom's lucky machete.
Yeah, it's like, is it like a claymore that you stuck between your teeth that you used as a knife? And he dives into the water. Stormy dives into the water with this knife between his teeth, and he goes down. And after a little bit of time, not like hours or anything, just several seconds, they started hearing all these like crazy sounds and like bubbles coming up from the water, and the ship started like rocking back and forth. It was getting kind of like yanked by the chain on the attached to the anchor. And like everyone was thinking like, oh my gosh, like if this doesn't stop soon, like this whole boat's going to capsize and we're all going to be stuck in the sea. But then just as suddenly it came on, it got calm again. The sea got calm, and Stormy bobbed up to the surface, and he climbed up the anchor chain into the ship. And once he got aboard, he like pulled up the anchor, and the Lady of the Sea, the ship, was able to start gliding through the ocean once again. And so the crew's like, what happened? Like, you were down there and all this crazy stuff started happening. It's like, oh, I just had a little fight with a 2-ton octopus. And everyone's like, what? A octopus? 2-ton octopus? What happened? What'd you do to him? And Stormy said, I have to quote this directly because it's amazing. Wrestled 8 slimy tentacles into double knots. It'll take a month of Sundays for him to untie himself. It's like a month of Sundays. I want to do the math of like how many months that would be.
I think
if it was like 30 Sundays.
Yeah, I think it'd be weeks. Almost a full year.
Yeah.
No.
It'd be like 2/3 of a year.
Yeah, 2/3 of a year, yeah. It's better math than me.
3/5 of a year. Yes, we can do math.
Sweet. This is
a mathematics podcast.
This is a personal jinx podcast. You owe me a soda because I don't know why we both were like so excited to say the same joke at the same time with each other.
So from then on, Stormy was like the most popular sailor aboard because, who else had wrestled with a 2-ton octopus and tied its tentacles into knots? Nobody, just Stormy. And even beyond the ship that he was a sailor on, his reputation started to spread until like all of the crews. And they're calling up these Yankee Clipper crews, which it's like a type of boat, I'm assuming.
What did you say?
Yankee Clipper. So yeah, it's like said specifically Yankee Clipper, which I'm assuming is like kind of a boat of some kind. Yeah. Like it seems like they're like the biggest boats.
Yes. So actually, and I was like, we'll get slightly more into this maybe at the end. Maybe I'll do it right now. Maybe I'll tell you. So part of what is like so appealing about like this story is like the nostalgia for these older boats, including clippers, which were these really tall, graceful, elegant boats that allowed for faster shipping. So they were like a kind of like a modern marvel of the time of when it came to like boats. They were like an elite class of wooden ships. And so you would want to be on a clipper.
Yeah, so it was like kind of a prestigious thing to be on the crew of a clipper.
Yeah.
But then also to have all the other clipper crews wanting you to be on their crew, then that made it was like you're already like kind of in an upper echelon of sailors by being on a clipper to begin with. But then the fact that like all the clippers wanted you is like you're top of the top, which makes sense because they're setting up that he was like super cool, super popular. Everybody loved him, but he still wasn't happy. And that was partly because there was like, even though he's on this gigantic ship, like there was no ship that existed in the world that was big enough for him. It says like whenever he stood close to the rail, she would almost like fall over.
Yeah, which I'm like, it's such a, I don't know, I would think it'd be a very funny boat to be sticking an extremely tall, huge man on, because they were known for, again, they were like thinner, they were faster. There was like, they had like limited freight space, but they could go quicker.
Right. And, having it weighed down by a giant
man.
Crew member probably did not help it be fast. But yeah, so it's like it would almost tip over when you got close to the railing. It says all the wood would get stripped up whenever he scrubbed the decks. And whenever he sang a sea shanty, the giant waves would roll over the sides of the boat because he was like, we rocketed it back and forth so much. And worst of all, poor old Stormy was still lonely because the hammocks that the crew of the Clipper would sleep in were so small that he had to sleep by himself in a rowboat, which I was picturing like, oh, they just have like a rowboat, like, below deck or whatever. But like something later, it says like very specifically that like the rowboat was like being towed along like behind the the ship. So he would like be like in a rowboat by himself, like being towed behind the boat itself, which is, so sad. You can't have good pillow talk with your homies if you're by yourself on the sea. Hammock talk.
I feel like
it sounds weird to call it pillow talk, but
yeah, I was like, I've only ever heard pillow talk referencing one specific type of conversation.
I haven't heard of it,
like an
like
intimate,
a type of conversation,
like an intimate conversation, but between like lovers.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right, of course.
But
my bad.
But like also like us, when you're like having a sleepover or something, or like you're at like scout camp, Girl Scout camp, or Boy Scout camp.
You're having pillow talk at Boy Scout camp.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? There's like that camaraderie that comes from...
I do know what you mean. I also
living together that closely.
am enjoying teasing you.
Even though I'm right.
Yes.
It says here in the same part too, like as it wasn't so much the pillow talk that he was missing out on, but he would be sleeping by himself in a rowboat that was getting like towed behind the boat. And he can hear the other sailors like singing and having a good time. Aww. And so like he was like, oh man, like they're having such a good time without me and I'm just here by myself.
That's right.
And once again, he's like, oh, my best friend, the sea, has betrayed me. And so he's like, you know what? It's time for this giant sailor to move on. And so one day when the Lady of the Sea dropped anchor in Boston once again, he told his friends, you know what? I am going to give up this seafaring life. I'm going to go out and I'm going to put an oar over my shoulder and I'm going to just start walking west. And he's like, I hear that there's room enough for any kind of folks out west, even ones that are as big as me, which could be true.
Yeah.
And the sailors are like talking, like, well, where are you going to go? Where are you going to settle down? And Stormy said, you know what? I'm going to walk and walk and walk with this oar over my shoulder. And the first place that someone stops me and asks me what that funny thing is on my shoulder, then I'll know that I'm far enough from the sea that I won't ever have to think about it again. Which I thought was like kind of a clever thing. Like go until no one recognizes what this is. And then I'll know that I'm so far from the sea.
You had me thinking like, oh yeah, if he like walks far enough west to like run into Paul Bunyan. And then the two of them,
they can be buddies.
Yeah. And they could have like their own little pillow talk in the middle of like the woods.
Yeah, they could. I'm picturing to him, like when I think of there being so much, I'm sure we're going to talk about this too, but like in history class and stuff like that, growing up, hearing about, the westward expansion and things like that, where it did just seem like it's like just wide open out there, even in the places where they're like wide open in like kind of a metaphorical sense. It's like there's not other British colonies and settlers and stuff there already. Like you could go out and like be where there are very few people, no big cities and stuff. But then also you get far enough out west and then you hit like the plains. And, especially if you've been in the middle part of this country, like Kansas and Iowa and these places where you can see like it's just so flat and open that it would be very comforting for someone that's so big to not feel like pressed in upon, I suppose. So anyway, Stormy's walking, trying to find somewhere that they don't know what an oar is, which I'm like, I feel like they'll still know there's rivers and stuff, right? But oh well. So he starts walking. He walks through Providence. He walks through New York. He walks through the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, the woods of Pennsylvania. He walks across the Allegheny Mountains, and he even floats down on flatboats down the old Ohio River. And as he's going, all these pioneers that he would come across would often like stop him and ask him to share dinner. And he was saying that this made him only feel all the more homesick because folks always guessed that he was, in fact, a sailor. Because they're like, he's got an oar over his shoulder. And so they'd ask him about the sea and ask him about being a sailor. And he's like, I'm not far enough yet. It wasn't until Stormy came to the plains of Kansas that finally a farmer was like, hey, man, what's that funny thing you got over your shoulder? And Stormy's like, you have asked the right question. I'm going to settle down here and I'm going to grow some potatoes. And that is exactly.
Kansas really is pretty far away from the ocean. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I've never felt more far away from an ocean than when I was in Kansas. Driving through Kansas, I was like, wow, I've never felt farther away from a tree. No, just kidding. They have trees. It's just a lot. It is a lot of like open, not a mountain to be seen.
Yeah. Fun random fact. Do you know what the flattest in elevation state in all of the United States is?
I have no idea. Is it going to blow my mind?
Maybe.
Oh, I'm like, is it one that I wouldn't have thought of?
I think so.
Because I would have said either Nebraska, Nebraska, Kansas. Like those would be my top guesses.
Yeah, I was like Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa.
Yeah,
those Nebraska maybe. Florida is the flattest state, which is why if the sea levels rise, it's a real big problem because the whole state's going to go under once it gets to a certain level. But anyway, I thought that did blow my mind.
That blew my mind too.
But it also kind of makes sense because it's like a peninsula and it's like got water on both sides. It's kind of like, unless there are big mountains, I mean, it would make sense that there could have been mountains or hills or something.
Yeah.
Into the middle. But anyway, fun fact for you all. And you all probably already knew that. But
I didn't.
I learned that recently. And Katrina usually knows more than me, but not about like American geography. I'll say that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Anyway, so that's what Stormy did. He settled down and soon became the best farmer around. He planted over 5 million potatoes and watered the entire crop with the sweat of his brow.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought you were about to say something else. I don't know why. I was like, he was urinating on it because like, I don't know. I was thinking of like children at like scout camps or whatever, like peeing out fires and stuff like that.
His fields weren't on fire, but it is pretty hilarious to think of like, him like wringing out his sweat, which I can't imagine would actually be good for the crops. Again, salty sweat.
Salty potatoes.
But maybe not enough to be that terrible. I don't know.
To ruin the taters.
Yeah, I don't know. This is not a horticultural podcast, thankfully.
I'm currently trying to grow some potatoes. I'll tell you how it turns out.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you should have one that you just water with the sweat of your brow that you...
It would die of dehydration.
Because you're not a giant.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so all the time, Stormy was watering, hoeing, picking, planting, but
I bet he was hoeing.
Yeah, but he still had not found a place that felt like home. And he still ran into problems like he was too big to go square dancing in the dance hall. He was too big to go visit other farmhouses. He was too big for meeting houses. He was too big for the general store. And so he started feeling, once again, a yearning for the sea. He missed like
I've been staring at the edge of I'll just keep referencing.
But not the edge of the water because he was far, like we said, far away. He said that he missed the fishy smelling breezes and salt spray. I was like, I don't know about the fishy smelling breezes, but I do love, because I live pretty close to the ocean. I love when it doesn't happen as often as I would think it would. And maybe just because I've gotten used to it, but like when I go out and I can smell the salty smell of the ocean in the air, there's something like very nice about that. And I think part of it is like nostalgia because I would only ever go to the beach like as a vacation when I was like a kid, so that's what I associate with that. But now it's just like I go to the grocery store and I'm like, oh, I can smell the ocean from here. Anyway, so he was again missing all the things, the fishy smelling breezes, the salty sprays. Never once in the prairie did a giant wave knock him down to his knees. Never did a hurricane whirl him across the earth. So he's like, how am I supposed to test my courage and test my strength if I'm not combating these titanic forces of nature?
Yeah, all I'm doing is watering
planting
potatoes.
5 million potatoes. You just need to wait for a tornado to come along. You could
grab it by the tail.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm pretty sure.
Paul Bunyan do that?
I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Can't step on. They had, this is why he's a sea guy. He realized like I can't get in on all Paul's territory.
Yeah, I'm like either Paul Bunyan did it or like Davy Crockett, one of these guys.
So one day, several years after Stormy had left Boston Harbor, the sailors of Boston Harbor saw a giant walking down the wharf, waving an oar over his head. And they were so excited to see him. They started whooping and hollering with joy. And they're all like, Stormy's back, guys, he's back. Which is like, you didn't feel at home. Well, I know why we didn't feel at home on those spots, but it's just so sad that he did have like a community, especially with the sailors, but still didn't feel like he was home. But now he comes back and everyone's super excited to see him. But as they got closer, they were like, oh my gosh, he's not looking good. He's like stooped over. His face is withered like a corn stalk, it said, probably a reference to Kansas and the Midwest where he had been living. And there were pale bags under his eyes. And so, word spread about Stormy's return and the fact that he was not looking so hot. And so thousands of sailors got together to meet to talk about the problem. Like, what are we going to do? We got to keep him here. He belongs with us. He's a sailor. He belongs with the sea. What are we going to do? And so one sailor was like, you know what? There's only one way that we can do this is we just have to build a ship that's big enough for Stormy to be inside of. And so all the other sailors were like, yeah, that's it. We got to do that. And so they all agreed. And they're like, we can't have him trailing behind us at night in his rowboat. Like, we need him to be able to be inside with us so we can sing our songs and have our pillow talk.
Aww.
And so the New England sailors set about building the biggest clipper ship in the entire world. I love like some of the specificity too. And I'm sure it comes into what we're talking about today too, but like talking about like American geography where it says, because it was the biggest ship, the sails had to be cut and sewn in the Mojave Desert where it was like big, open and flat enough for them to do, lay the sails out. After the ship was built, there was a lumber shortage in all of America. And it took 40 seamen to manage the pilot's wheel, unless the captain was Alfred Bulltop Stormalong himself, who could whirl the ship's wheel with his baby finger. And Stormalong, when they built this ship for him, he named it the Courser. Oh yeah, I think this is like one of the ones I'm basically going to read this next paragraph like word for word because there's so much fun language. But so Stormalong names the clipper the Courser and takes off for the maiden voyage on the Courser and steers it out of Boston Harbor and starts, sailing this thing, soaring over the waves. His cheeks glowing with the sunburn. His hair was sparkling with ocean spray. And the salt water started coursing through his veins again. He was right where he belonged on that sea. And soon enough, Stormy and the Courser, they're going and taking cargo all over the world, India, China, Europe, everywhere. But it says that it took 4 weeks to get all hands on deck. Teams of white horses carried sailors from stem to stern. The ship's towering mast had to be hinged to let the sun and moon go by. The tips of the mast were padded so they wouldn't punch holes in the sky. The trip to the crow's nest took so long the sailors who climbed up to the top returned with gray beards. The vessel was so big that once, when she hit an island in the Caribbean Sea, she knocked it clear into the Gulf of Mexico. But one of the Courser's most memorable escapades took place in the English Channel. As they were trying to sail the ship through the English Channel near the cliffs of Dover, the width of the beam of the ship was so wide that they couldn't get through this passageway in the English Channel. And so the first mate's like, it's impossible. We can't wedge it through. We got to turn back. And another sailor's like, quick, we got to turn before we, dash her on the rocks. And Stormy's like, no, don't turn her around. Get us all the soap we've got on this ship and get it on deck. And so the crew thought Stormy had lost their mind, but they're like, he's the captain. So they went and they hauled up a 3-ton shipment of soap that they had just picked up in Holland. And Stormy's like, all right, now swab her sides until she's as slippery as an eel. And the sailors are all like, aye, aye, captain. And they started to sing a shanty as they started, scrubbing the sides of the ship with all this soap. And Stormy was then like, once it was good and sudsed up, he's like, all right, now it's time to take her on through. And so the sails caught the wind and Stormalong eased the ship between the Dover cliffs through the English Channel. And then ever since that day, because they were able to slip through with that soap, the cliffs of Dover have been as milky white as a whale's belly, and the sea below still foams with soap suds. Which, I'm a sucker for what are they called? With like is it Just So story? Like when they talk about why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
By some like interesting, crazy thing. And so for years, Stormalong, because of all these exploits, he was the most famous sea captain in the entire world. So every sailor at all the ports knew all about him. They knew how he ate ostrich eggs for breakfast. They knew how he drank hundreds of gallons of whale soup for lunch and had a warehouse full of shark meat for dinner. And then after he would eat, it was famously known for picking his teeth with an 18-foot long oar that some have said was the very same oar that he'd carried over his shoulder as he walked all the way to Kansas.
He kept it for tooth-picking purposes.
Uh-huh. And it was also said that sometimes when the crew was singing their shanties late at night, they talk a lot about shanties in this story.
Mm-hmm.
That the giant captain would stand all by himself on the deck of the ship and gaze out at the sea with this look of sorrow in his eyes. Then, after the Civil War, steamships took over with the transport of cargo on the seas, and the days of the great sailing ships came to an end. And so little by little, these crews that had once, steered and manned these beautiful Yankee clippers across the oceans also started to disappear. And they say that no one remembers how old Stormalong was when he died, but they just could remember his funeral. And at one foggy day, thousands and thousands of sailors attended his funeral, and they covered him with 100 yards of the finest China silk. And then 50 sailors carried his huge coffin to a grave near the sea. And they dug the sand with silver spades, lowered his coffin with a silver cord, and they wept tears like rain. And for years afterwards, they sang about him. And then, in another little coda to the story, they say that ever since then, seamen first class put ABS after their names. And most people say that ABS means able-bodied seamen. But the old New England seafaring men know different. They know that it stands for the most amazing deep-water sailor who ever lived. Alfred Bulltop Stormalong. The end.
And that last part, that is true. That it's not true. What?
They named themselves after Alfred Bulltop Stormalong. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sailors put ABS. I'd never heard that before.
Or just AB. And what AB means is that you are an able seaman.
Uh-huh.
And that means that you have had at least 2 years of experience at sea. So I'm like, I love that as like a little kind of like a fake etymology of of like a word. All right. So backing up though, now to talk about the history. Back when we did our sea shanty episode, when it was like the TikTok smash hit of just a bunch of sea shanties, but more particularly, what was that one called?
The Weller Man?
The Weller Man.
Soon may the Weller Man come.
We did an episode on sea shanties, and I had ordered a book. I really wanted to read all this book. I couldn't find this book on archive.org, and so I had ordered a copy of this book called Shanties from the Seven Seas, Shipboard Work Songs and Songs Used as Work Songs from the Great Days of Sail, collected by Stan Hugel. The book did not show up at my house until after we had already done the episode, which was fine because we ended up covering a lot of like other stuff. And I thought to myself, I'm never
gonna read this book now.
Yeah, I'm never gonna use this book. This is because, and this is true, I don't have a podcast devoted to folk songs, which is a crying shame because maybe someday we'll get into like talking about like ballads and ballad singing. I love it. I find it fascinating. I don't feel like I know nearly enough about it to cover it as a topic. I'm not an ethnomusicologist.
I can't even spell ethnomusicologist.
Yeah, I can't even spell ethnomusicologist. So I thought that I would never, ever, ever use this book again. And so then when I was looking at this story and Stormalong and its connections with sea shanties, and it was funny because in the middle of your retelling, you like said like, oh, a lot of references to sea shanties in here. Well, boom, get ready for it, Geoff.
Ready. I'm ready.
So, like I had said previously, Stormalong had started as a character inside of sea shanties. And as with a lot of things in American history, and when you're looking at the stories, you have to remember like what a melting pot of people and situations there were and like what was going on in the US like at any given time in regards to a lot of different people. And when we did our sea shanty episode, we talked a lot about how a lot of the songs that have been collected have African American or African roots because of the slave trade. And there's a lot of like African influence in most of the music in the United States, specifically the South. And on so many ships, there was that influence from not just African people that were on American vessels, but also any of the vessels that were in the Caribbean islands, because you'd have like Jamaican, Haitian, Cuban, like African American or African people had been taken and forced to work in plantations in those areas as well.
Yeah.
And so people eventually also were on boats with that musical influence. And so the old shanty about Stormalong actually has roots in the African musical influence.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, when you consider like everything that, you know, goes into like these songs, and you think of like oh, the sailors and how sailors from the like America were usually depicted, and you don't often think about African people or African American people being on these boats and influencing the music of them, especially when it comes to work songs. So the book that is Shanties from the Seven Seas, it was originally written in the 1960s and then reprinted in the 90s. And I'm saying that because I'm going to read a quote, and some of the language would not necessarily be the language that I would have chosen to use. So, because I wanted to quote in his section that was on the Stormalong songs. So, a fine old shanty was Stormalong. Like Lowland Away, it was originally used at the pumps and later sung at the capstan. Although there are those who believe it was built around John Willis, the owner of the Cuddy Sark, there is no doubt at all but that it is of Negro origin, and of course older vintage than the Cully Sark period. Negro songs are to be found with Stormalong Stormy, refrains dating back to the 30s and 40s in the Ethiopian collections of Negro folk songs. And Nordhoff gives one form sung in the 30s by the Hoosiers of the Gulf ports. All the variants of this song have come from, or at some time or another passed through and have been molded in the shanty mart of Mobile Bay. Many of the couplets found in Stormalong are in other Negro songs. So I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about Stormalong that I give the African and African American influences its due in this tall tale, especially because like when it moved into becoming a tall tale and tall talk, it started to focus itself more in areas like Cape Cod and Boston, when the song itself had come from much further down the country. I'm looking at Mobile Bay. I'm assuming Mobile, Alabama. Does Alabama touch the ocean?
Yeah, Mobile Bay. I didn't know there was a bay there, but yeah, Mobile is right there. And there's a pretty big bay.
Oh, dang. I also did not know. I don't know the U.S. geography. So, some of the music that has been collected, I want to not sing part of it because they have the tunes here. I cannot sight read and sing music at all anymore. I've gotten too out of practice.
I never could.
I could never well.
Yeah, I'll say that too. I could never do it well.
Yeah.
I don't actually know if I could or not. I did have to one time sight read for an audition, like something I'd never seen before. I don't know if I was anywhere close when I did that. And any other time I've been like sight reading, I've been with other people in like a choir that could do it. And I just would listen to what they're doing and like copy them. So it's like, I don't know if, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know to what degree I was sight reading and knowing or just copying the people that were around me.
Yeah. Just
anyway,
knowing enough to be like, yes, we go up here.
Yeah. I could tell whether we were going up or down. That was for sure. Yeah. But like, I was just guessing beyond that.
So it's interesting that in the retelling that is in American Tall Tales by Mary Pope Osborne, that she makes sure to reference the funeral, because that actually is what a lot of the sea shanties have, is the funeral for this man, or like singing as if you're his son, like remembering your dad. So in one of the songs, which there's some songs that say that he is down in Mobile Bay, like that's where he's buried, which again, fascinating that like over time he moved further north to where, and we'll get into it, where it was more nostalgic for people to think that he was. But in one song, I wish I was old Stormy's son. I'd build a ship 1,000 ton. I'd sail this wide world round and round. With plenty of money I'd be found. We'd sail this old world round and round and get hot rum. Oh, I'll be bound. I'll load her up with Jamaica rum, and all me shellbacks they'll have some. We'd get our drinks, lads, every man, with a bleedin' big bottle for the shanty man. I'd load her up with grub and gin and stay in the port that we was in. I'd feed ye well and raise your pay and stand ye drinks 3 times a day. And when we get to Liverpool town, we'll dance them duties round and round. Oh, storm along, and around we'll go. Oh, storm along through ice and snow. When Stormy died, he made a will to give us sailors gin to swill. Was ye ever in Quebec, a stowing timber on the deck? I wish I was in Baltimore, on the grand old American shore. So, now, how did it go from a shanty sung by sailors with a lot of African influence to becoming a tale of a man up in Boston? It has a lot to do with the end of the clipper ship and the modernization of the ocean. In the same way that in the sea shanty episode, when we were talking about like, oh, what happened to sea shanties? Well, these were songs that were being sung for working, like pulling up anchors and pulling in sails, like a lot of the stuff where you needed to be doing stuff in time, rowing with each other in certain spots. Like it was for that hard labor. And when they invented steamships, a lot of that labor went away. Yeah. And so you weren't singing these songs unless you were just singing to sing when you were hanging out with people.
It's like you didn't need it to keep a large group of people in time with one another to do the work of whatever they needed to do.
And then you needed less and less people on the boat as well to be doing the jobs. And so slowly over time, those went away. And so the stories of Stormalong actually started becoming tall tales that were being shared with people who were also experiencing a period of nostalgia in the United States. After the Civil War, there was a lot of nostalgia for a lot of different things, that the way things used to be. Again, as problematic as you celebrate 250 years as a country, you would hope that there's been some growth. You know what I mean? And so it's like you look back on the history and you're like, there's some problematic things that like happened or even influenced stories being told and created. But sailors and other people who were familiar with like port towns and stuff started telling stories about old Stormalong and their days at sea and what it was like, and telling these big exaggerated stories and using characters that they knew from songs that they would be singing. And so wherever some of those sailors just kind of ended up, that's where they started telling the stories. And the old Stormalong stories took off really well in the Cape Cod and Boston areas in the Northeast shores of the United States. And so you started getting those stories being told. And I'm like, let me see if I got a good quote from old Mary Pope Osborne. She says, when the Civil War ended in 1865, steamships and later oil-burning ships took over the work of the clippers. The days of the great wind-driven wooden boats soon came to an end. Stormalong was first immortalized in Old Stormalong, a popular sea shanty or work song sung by sailors when they weighed anchor or hoisted the sails. So she says, the story of Stormalong has since been retold a number of times. The popularity of the tale is due at least in part to the nostalgic, romantic appeal of the tall, graceful clippers and admiration for the skill and physical courage of the sailors who piloted them. So thought that was super, super fascinating look at a tall tale and a good excuse to finally use the sea shanty book that I bought
many years ago.
like 4 years ago.
Yeah, I'm glad we're able to.
I do think that it's funny that it's like of a book that I got like 4 years ago, and then I'm like reading like, oh, this like American sea shanty, and I was like, I know I have a book. Let me look in this book, look in the index and see if it says anything. And I was like, sure enough, it absolutely did say something. And I was like, boom.
Amazing.
Did it. So it's funny because I'll look at the books on my bookshelf and I know that there's information in there. I just got to get it out.
How to extract it.
But anyway, a book that I recently picked up from my local library, that it was on a display that they had set up for the 250th anniversary of the United States declaring independence from Britain. And this book was called From Sea to Shining Sea, A Treasury of American Folklore and Folk Songs. This book compiled by Amy L. Cohn. This book is awesome. I'm very tempted to find myself a copy, as if I don't have enough books. The thing that I love about this book, so listen, I will say this. It was written in the 1990s. It is not as woke as I would like it to be. I will say that. I will start off by saying that. But the thing that I absolutely love about this book, as I was flipping through it, is it it tries to go in kind of a chronological order. And so when it starts the book, it is starting with the creation stories of the Native American people, multiple different nations. And so it's we have the story of Sedna from the Inuit, and we also have coyote stories, and grandmother spider steals a son. A lot of different creation stories that honor the Native American stories from the country. I do appreciate that. And then also it's a mix of folk songs that are found in the United States and stories, both legends and stories of real people, that it's mostly historical, if not all the way historical, but it's all woven together. And then also it includes the complication of the fact that different groups were showing up in the United States at different times and receiving different treatments when they arrived in the United States. And so one thing that I thought would be nice to honor in this episode, especially because I was I don't know if we're going to do multiple episodes on the subject of hey, yay, America 250 or whatever. So I was this one, I had never heard this story, and I think it's an important one to tell. And it's called The Iron Moonhunter. So in this book, From Sea to Shining Sea, A Treasury of American Folklore and Folk Songs, there's the story The Iron Moonhunter being retold by Kathleen Chang. And to set the scene for this story, it takes place in the fall and winter of 1866. And here's the thing with legends, is that it's always hard to tell what is fact and historical fact, that verifiable, and then where it starts to go into the exaggeration or the fanciful. And so I would encourage people, if they want, because I'm going to basically be retelling this story in the style of it being a legend, which is to lean into the idea that all of it is real. When you are retelling a legend, the idea is that you, the teller, are telling it as if it is all 100% true. But I do want to tell my audience that before you go and teach this in a history class is 100% fact, I would look this up. So that you know which parts happened and which parts didn't. So setting the stage for this story, we are going to be talking about the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States. And you would think that I'd be talking about John Henry after we just talked about tall tales and larger than life, American figures, and railroads, John Henry. And that, if people don't know the story of John Henry, I'm not going to tell the whole thing, but basically it comes down to another story about a larger than life man up against modernization, not to mention the struggles of African American people in the United States and trying to make a life and a living for them and their families. But we're not telling that story today, even though it's an incredible story. We are going to be talking about the Chinese immigrants that came to the western part of the United States because they were being offered work contracts in the 1860s. And there was a lot of exploitation. This won't shock anybody. There was a lot of exploitation that was going on at the time to get workers out into the United States to be building these railway lines and making a lot of money for the railway owners. If you've ever played the game Monopoly, you might be somewhat familiar with the concept of owning railroads. So getting a lot of labor, they would go to China and tell people like, oh, hey, we've got these really great paying jobs, all these like really plentiful jobs. You'd be really great. You could send all this money home to your family, or someday have your family immigrate to the United States with you. It'd be a really great opportunity. You'd be an idiot to pass it up. And then they would stick people on these boats, cram them into these boats, and they would spend about 8 weeks on the ocean getting all the way there. And then when they would get to the United States, they would see what kind of work conditions they would be in, what they actually were going to be receiving, and they were trapped. They could not get back because most of them, the way that they had paid to get out was like, oh, my first like 4 weeks pay or whatever is going to repay the person who boated me over or whatever. But then they essentially were trapped in the United States. And so this story is a story that was told among the Chinese immigrants in the United States who were working on the railway lines. So this story starts off by saying, more than 100 years ago, many Chinese people came to America to build a railroad. So they came to America being told all about how it is, the Golden Mountain. You're going to be in this, the Golden Mountains of California. There's gold in them thar hills. And they told them, what I just said about you're going to have all these, like, there's going to be all these good wages and you're going to have so many amazing opportunities and they'll be incredible. And when they got there, they were met with horrible conditions, finding out that they'd been trapped too far away from home. And so they had to stay and work on the Central Pacific Railway. So they were working high up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I'm like, I know that area. I know it really well. I'm like, we're talking about Donner Pass, if anybody's familiar with that party. So they were met with horrible work conditions, and they would also be working from sunrise to sunset, chopping down these giant redwood trees, which again, I'm like, oh, that hurts my heart just because of like, like how much of the American, like the country's like natural resources and beauty were being bulled down for capitalism. It's fine. It's not fine. It's horrible. But anyway, they had to lift tons of steel and rock and move them every single day, day in and day out. And they also were facing the aggression from white people who felt like they lost their job opportunity because non-American in like air quotes, were being hired to, I'll say non-white people were being hired to work on these railroads. And so of course the white people who felt like their jobs were being stolen were attacking the Chinese people. It's sad how much I'm like, you'd hope in 250 years there'd be a lot of progress. But anyway, this is all just bumming me out now. So sometimes they were just being attacked by white people who were sometimes causing problems like along the way, attacking some of the Chinese people, and sometimes they would lose their lives. And also they had to deal with the bad work conditions leading to deaths. So one day these workers were trying to blast a ledge into a granite cliff. And there were some cousins there, and these are the Kwan cousins. And the Kwan cousins would dangle over the edge of the cliff in these baskets. Again, not good work conditions. And while they were in these baskets, they would be drilling holes in the rock and putting gunpowder and fuses in the holes until they, got up, and then they'd light the fuses. And then once they lit the last fuse, the people who were above would try to quickly pull their basket up before the explosions happen as they were trying to blast their way through this rock to build this railway. And bit by bit, a path that was wide enough for the railroad was being carved into this granite face of the mountains. And the Kwans loved when they were able to sit high up on these mountains and look across the Sierra Nevadas at the beautiful and rugged wild world of the Golden Mountain. They felt like it was hard work, but they were planning on getting as much money as they could so that they could send it back to their families or have their families come and meet them here. Because these men, these like cousins, they had left, the rest of their family behind and they wanted everybody to be together again. But one day, the rope that held up Quan Hop's basket broke and he fell to his death in the river gorge that was 2,000 feet below. And Quan Ming and Quan Chang, they climbed down the cliff so that they could try to find their cousin so that they could bury him by the side of the river, and they could not find his body, which was, of course, devastating. Not just because they couldn't bury him, but they were worried that his soul wouldn't be able to rest. And then winter came. And I previously just joked about like the Donner Party and stuff, but the snow, like the issue is the amount of snow that is in the Sierra Nevadas, where winter came and there was 40 feet of snow that had fallen, which I'm like, that's not like an insane amount of snow like for that area.
But it is an insane amount of snow, period.
Yeah. So winter came and it was 40 feet of snow had fallen, and the bosses of the Central Pacific Railroad would not let the Chinese people stop working, even though all of the tall trees were buried in snow. And so they tried to dig caves in their snow for shelter and tunnels that would lead them to air shafts in the snow and mazes of snow tunnels so that they could get to and from work and to and from their food and each other. But often there'd be cave-ins of these snow tunnels and people were being buried alive. And one night, Quan Xiang went out to get supplies and he never came back. And they weren't able to find his body either. And so winter passed and the snow melted. And in the spring, Quan Ming missed his two cousins, Quan Hop and Quan Jiang, and he would wake up in the middle of the night thinking that he could see them standing by his bed. And when he would be near like a pool of water, either when he was getting a drink from a communal bucket or near a body of water, he would think he was seeing their faces looking up at him from the water. And he started to talk to other people, other Chinese people who were in the group who had also lost family members who had been out there. And they all were experiencing the same thing. Friends that had died in explosions, other cave-ins, landslides, attacks by the angry white men that thought their jobs had been taken. So many ways that they had lost friends and loved ones and family members, and they felt like they were being haunted by the spirits of their dead friends who could not pass on. So one night, the cook, Ah Ding, he dropped a big pot of hot soup and started screaming into it for his friend, and was screaming like, "Why are you following me? Why are you following me? Are you hungry?" Which I thought that was such an interesting question, just because of one, he was in a bowl of, like, the cook thought he saw his friend like in this like bowl of soup. So, you think, oh, hungry. But also I think of like hungry ghosts or like these unsettled spirits that can't rest. And so Quan Ming, he was like, oh, I know that like your friend, he died in this landslide last winter and you're seeing a ghost spirit. And then they all, started sharing all these stories with each other that like, whenever I go to sleep, I dream about my brother, and I dream of his ghost is looking for his arms because he lost them in an explosion, which I'm like, oh gosh, that's like horrifying.
Yeah.
So they all started talking about like it's this railroad. We've all lost our loved ones to this railroad. What we should do is we should blow up the railroad. We should do something to like damage it. And Quan Ming was like, no. The railroad is our work. It's the thing that is what we were working towards together, so that we all had this common goal, even with all of our friends, so that we could finish this, get money, and return to our families. I think that the way forward is to use a railroad to get the spirits of our friends and our brothers and our cousins out of these mountains. We have to find a way to take care of their spirits and make peace for their spirits. And Quan Ming was like, I think what we need to do is build a railroad for the spirits. We'll build the finest train in the world, and we'll ride our train to find the spirits of our friends and our brothers. And so that's what they did. While they were working on the Central Pacific Railroad, they started to save some of the steel rails, or if any trains went off the rails and crashed, they would scavenge for parts. And they started building this train in the shape of a dragon, and they called it the Iron Moonhunter. And so they went into the Sierras in the free time, and they were looking for gold and silver so that they could decorate their train with silver whiskers and golden teeth that could gleam in the night while they hunted for the spirits to gather the spirits of their friends. And they painted the train in bright colors and intricate designs. They gave this train wings to help him balance on the high mountain ridges, and they would ride this train through the railways looking for the spirits that had become lost along the railway. And they gave this dragon these large searchlights as eyes so that it could peer into the darkness, so that the light from it could guide the spirits back to the train. And so these Chinese people, they rode the Moonhunter back over the tracks that they had laid. They would wait in tunnels where they knew people had died or disappeared. They'd go down cliff edges and search by waterways. And it says the cousins wept with joy to see the beautiful train their friends had built to find them. Soon all the ghost spirits heard the Moonhunter's song, and one by one, out of the mountain's shadows, they stepped into the yellow light shining from the dragon's eyes. Now they were all together again. And the first railroad workers, they grew old and died, but the ghost of the Chinese workers still ride the Moonhunter through the Sierra Nevadas, and they still look after the spirits that were lost in the Golden Mountains. And the Iron Moonhunter plays its song.
Ooh.
This is also a story that they would use to talk about any of the railways that have been found that abruptly end, that like they start going off in a direction and then abruptly end. They say that, they were built by these like workers so that they could ride the Moonhunter to find lost spirits, and that the like the purpose that those like areas serve is to find these lost spirits. But I wanted to include that story when we were talking about, like, yay, American, like, tall tales of myth. Because I'm like, that is a story that, like, I was not familiar with at all. And it's not one that, there's a lot of tall tales that you'll hear if you're taking, like, a history class in the United States. But when it comes to non-white immigrants into the United States, you very rarely get to hear stories about their experience and stories that they have created about their experience in the United States, and even the work that has been done by their hands, by their people in this country. And so I wanted to include that story because a fascinating section of American history that should be remembered, that in the last 250 years, everybody's been doing building in this country to turn it into what it is today. So, even though I am not a particularly patriotic person, I hope that today I mustered a little bit of patriotism. I know that I definitely had some brief asides of critique. I wouldn't say non-patriotism, just critique. I wish for 250 years forward of a lot more progress. I think we can do it with a lot of heavy lifting.
Thank you for listening to The Fairy Tellers. If you enjoy what we're doing, please leave us a review or share us with your friends. For access to exclusive bonus content, consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefairytellers. Special thanks to Andy Forey for our music and to Clarice Inch for our artwork. And of course, a big thank you to all our patrons. Without all of you, this show wouldn't be possible.
Good stories pay little attention to cultural or linguistic frontiers. The student of story collections find themselves adrift on an ocean of stories. an ocean which is boundless, deep, and ceaseless in motion. Robert Irwin.
What confuses me is that I forget that California, it tucks itself up under and cradles the butt of Nevada. And I forget about that.
Yeah. It kind of makes Nevada its little spoon.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you just got to remember that.
Yeah. I mean, and now I'll always know.
That image burned into your mind of Nevada, sorry, for all you Nevadans, and California having snuggles and pillow talk.
I don't know how much of this episode I'm going to cut. I'm not going to lie to you.
I hope none of it.